Tyler Lancaster didn't believe in bad omens. But if he did, he might have considered the fact that his coffee machine exploded that morning a pretty solid sign that the day was going to be a disaster. It wasn't a slow breakdown. No blinking red light, no pitiful last trickle of coffee, no warning. 1 second it was brewing his usual black-as-midnight sludge. The next, it let out a death rattle and shot a geyser of boiling liquid straight into his face. He didn't even flinch. He had been shot at in the army, taken shrapnel to the leg, and woken up in a hospital bed with nurses whispering about how lucky he was to still have both his arms. A little scalding coffee wasn't enough to make him lose his cool. No, that would come later. Still, standing in his kitchen, wiping lukewarm caffeine off his face, he muttered to himself, just a normal Wednesday. Because that's what you do when your entire life has trained you to expect the worst. Tyler Lancaster was a man who had never gotten a lucky break. His parents died when he was 5, drunk driver, the kind of senseless tragedy the news anchors always talked about in that hushed, pitying tone. He grew up bouncing between relatives who treated him more like an inconvenient houseplant than family. At 18, he joined the army because, well, what else was there? A stint in the Middle East left him with a bad knee, a couple of medals he never looked at, and a tendency to assume every loud noise was probably gunfire. By 27, he had finally found something good. Diane. She had been 25 at the time, sharp-tongued and quick-witted, with the kind of laugh that made him forget the world had ever done him wrong. He had never been a sentimental guy, but if he had been, he would have said that marrying Diane was the first time he ever felt like he belonged somewhere. They built a life together. 2 kids, Jack and Jessica, both of whom somehow ended up taller than their father, a house he worked his bones to afford, and just enough happiness to make him believe, for the first time, that maybe he wasn't cursed after all. Then came Wednesday. And Wednesday, as it turned out, had other plans. The first real clue that something was off was not Diane's behavior, but Jessica's. 16-year-olds are mysterious creatures. Tyler had long accepted that his daughter would never voluntarily share information about her life, but that morning, she was acting even stranger than usual. She had come down to breakfast already in a mood, crossed arms, glaring at him like he personally ruined her life, which was not an unusual look for a teenager. But the second Diane came into the kitchen, Jessica lit up like a Christmas tree. "Morning, Mom," she chirped, grabbing orange juice from the fridge like she was suddenly auditioning for Daughter of the Year. Tyler squinted at her. This was a kid who, just last week, had grown dramatically when Diane reminded her to take out the trash, like it was a personal attack on her freedom. Now she was helping Diane set the table. The actual table. The one no one ever used because it was reserved for special occasions that never actually happened. Tyler sat back in his chair, watching this bizarre show unfold. "What's going on?" he asked, pointing his spoon at Jessica. "Nothing," she replied, too quickly. He turned his gaze to Diane, who was suddenly way too interested in stirring her coffee. "Diane." She didn't look up. "What? Anything you'd like to share with the class?" "Nope." Jessica gave him a tight smile. "Not everything is about you, Dad." That was new. Jack, his 20-year-old son, wandered in at that moment, bleary-eyed and barefoot, scratching at his head like he had just crawled out of the depths of exhaustion. He took one look at Jessica's expression, then at Diane's, and then locked eyes with Tyler. Something passed between them. Tyler didn't know exactly what it was, but he knew his son well enough to recognize when the kid was biting his tongue. Later, when Diane had left for work and Jessica had left for school, Jack dropped down into the chair across from him and said, "You're going to want to sit down for this." "I'm already sitting." "Good." Jack sucked in a breath, shaking his head. "Because I found out something that's about to ruin your week." Tyler just leaned back, bracing himself. "Go on." 20 minutes later, he was holding his face in his hands, wondering if it was too early to start drinking. It wasn't Diane's phone. It wasn't some crumpled receipt from a fancy dinner she shouldn't have been at. No, Jack had caught Diane's secret the old-fashioned way, by accident. Turns out, college baseball teams sometimes like to party, and one of Jack's roommates was a pitcher for the local team. Last weekend, Jack had gone to pick him up from some party, and who did he find in the middle of a crowd of sweaty 20-somethings, looking way too cozy with some 6'3", 26-year-old, stupid-as-bricks third baseman? Diane. Jack, being Jack, had done the sensible thing. He didn't confront her. He didn't make a scene. He just quietly took a video on his phone and left. Now, that video was sitting on the kitchen table between them, paused at the exact moment Diane had leaned up and kissed her much younger friend. Tyler exhaled slowly. "You okay, Dad?" Oh, yeah, just great. Finding out your wife is having a midlife crisis with a guy whose brain is probably 90% sunflower seeds is exactly how I wanted to spend my morning. Jack didn't even crack a smile. What are you going to do? Not sure yet. Tyler stared at the screen. Diane looked so happy, like she hadn't a single care in the world. And that was what really got him. Not the cheating itself, not the betrayal, but the fact that she was happy. He had spent 23 years making sure that woman never wanted for anything. He had worked through injuries, through exhaustion, through a lifetime of bad luck just to give her something solid. And now, this? No. Tyler Lancaster didn't believe in bad omens, but he did believe in getting even. Jack sat across from Tyler, watching him like he was some kind of science experiment about to explode. Tyler wasn't sure if he should be impressed or concerned that his son had the good sense to gather evidence before bringing this bombshell home. Most kids would have either ignored it or confronted their mother like a soap opera protagonist. Jack, however, had filmed the whole thing like a documentarian studying the mating habits of delusional women and their midlife crises. Tyler took his phone off the table and pressed play again, just to make sure he hadn't imagined it. Nope. Still there. Diane, all smiles, leaning into some kid who probably still needed his coach to remind him to stretch before a game. The video was short, maybe 10 seconds long, but that was all it took. So, Jack said, arms crossed. What now? Tyler wasn't sure. That was the problem. He had no plan for this. In the Army, when a situation went sideways, you followed protocol. Here, there was no protocol. Nobody trained you for wife ditches 23 years of marriage for a guy whose biggest life achievement is hitting a ball really far. His first instinct was to walk straight up to Diane and lay the video in front of her like a court exhibit. But then what? She'd deny it, make excuses, maybe even try to twist it back on him. That was what people like Diane did when they got caught, made themselves the victim, spun it so that they weren't at fault. He could already hear it. I was unhappy. You were distant. I needed excitement. This just happened. Things like this didn't just happen. I need more, Tyler finally said, setting the phone down. Jack nodded like he'd already expected that answer. Thought so. That's why I've got a plan. Tyler raised an eyebrow. You do? Jack smirked. Dad, I grew up in the age of social media. I know how to find dirt on people. It was a strange thing to be proud of, but at this moment, Tyler was grateful for his son's generation and their questionable internet skills. Jack stood up, stretching. Give me a day. Maybe two. I'll get what we need. Tyler didn't bother asking how. Some things were better left unknown. That night, he went about his usual routine, but everything felt different. Diane came home late, as expected. Jessica was upstairs, no doubt texting her mother about how insufferable her father was. And Tyler? He was sitting on the couch, watching reruns of a show he didn't care about, wondering how the last 2 decades had led to this. Diane barely looked at him when she walked in. Long day, she sighed, tossing her bag on the table. Yeah, Tyler replied, not looking away from the TV. Lots of grating? She hesitated just long enough for him to catch it. Yeah, liar. She went upstairs without another word. Tyler sat there, gripping the remote, resisting the urge to go after her and shove Jack's video in her face. But no, not yet. He needed to be smarter about this. The next morning, Jack had updates. Baseball guy's name is Ethan Carter, Jack said over coffee, sliding his phone across the table. He's 26, plays third base, and thinks posting shirtless pictures of himself in locker rooms makes him a philosopher. Tyler picked up the phone, scrolling through Ethan's social media. It was exactly what he expected. The usual self-absorbed nonsense, gym selfies, motivational quotes that meant nothing, captions like hustle, grind, win. So, this is the guy your mom threw away our family for? Tyler muttered. Great choice. Jack smirked. It gets better. Turns out, he's got a girlfriend. Tyler actually choked on his coffee. You're kidding. Jack grinned. Nope. Her name's Brooke. She's 24. And get this, she's a law student. The universe was handing Tyler a gift. Where'd you find her? Instagram. She posts him all the time. Comment sections are full of cringy couple nonsense. Jack shook his head. But here's the best part. Brooke has no idea about mom. Tyler had never believed in karma, but he was starting to reconsider. So, what's the move? Jack asked, watching his father carefully. Tyler exhaled. He was still angry, still hurt, still trying to process everything. But one thing was clear, Diane didn't deserve to get away with this. We tell her, he said. Jack grinned. I was hoping you'd say that. That evening, Tyler sat at the kitchen table, phone in hand, staring at Brooke's profile. Her last post was a picture of her and Ethan at some event, captioned "Love of my life." Well, that was about to change. He clicked message and started typing. An hour later, his phone buzzed. "Brooke, who are you?" Tyler didn't waste time. "Tyler, just a guy whose wife is sleeping with your boyfriend." A long pause. Then, "Brooke, what?" Tyler sent the video. It took another few minutes before she responded. "Brooke, are you sure this is recent?" Tyler, "Filmed last week. Your boyfriend and my wife. Nice pair, huh?" This time, it took even longer for a response. "Brooke, can you meet? I need to know everything." Tyler stared at the message. Meeting a stranger to discuss their cheating spouses wasn't exactly on his bucket list. But at this point, why not? Tyler, name the place. Jack insisted on coming along, mostly for entertainment value. They met Brooke at a coffee shop. She was young, polished, and looked like someone who always had a plan, until now. Now, she just looked exhausted. She slid into the booth across from Tyler and Jack, setting her phone down. "Tell me everything." Tyler did. Brooke listened, her expression unreadable. When he was done, she sat back and exhaled sharply. "That moron," she muttered. "I should have known. He always talks about older women like they're some kind of trophy." Jack snorted. "Your boyfriend's got mommy issues." Brooke rolled her eyes. "Clearly." Tyler leaned forward. "So, what are you going to do?" Brooke's lips curled into a slow, dangerous smirk. "Oh, don't worry," she said. "Ethan's about to have the worst week of his life." For the first time in days, Tyler actually smiled. Jack grinned. "I like her." Tyler did, too. This was going to be interesting. Tyler had been through a lot in life, but he had never had the pleasure of sitting across from a 24-year-old law student while plotting the social demise of his cheating wife and her stupid baseball-playing boyfriend. It was a new experience. Not one he had ever thought he'd have, but life was full of surprises. Brooke had come prepared. She had a folder. A literal folder. Tyler wasn't sure what he had expected, but the sight of her flipping through printed screenshots like she was presenting a corporate sales pitch was both disturbing and impressive. "So," Brooke said, sliding a paper toward him, "here's something fun. Ethan's been texting multiple women, not just your wife. I pulled his phone records while he was in the shower last week. Turns out, he's been extra busy." Tyler picked up the paper. He didn't need to read it. He already knew what it said. Jack, meanwhile, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, smirking like this was the best thing to ever happen. "Wow, your boyfriend's really dedicated to his craft." Brooke exhaled sharply. "Yeah, well, I'm about to dedicate myself to ruining his career." Tyler raised an eyebrow. "He has a career?" Brooke didn't even blink. "Okay, his potential career." She had a point. Ethan wasn't exactly on track to be the next baseball legend. He played for some minor league team that nobody outside of the town cared about, and his biggest claim to fame was almost making it to a major league training camp 3 years ago. Almost. Jack took another sip of his coffee. "So, what's the plan? Public humiliation? Exposing him to the team? Letting his grandma know he's a dirtbag?" Brooke looked at him like he had just suggested something illegal. "I was thinking more along the lines of contacting the team's PR manager. Minor league guys don't have a lot of room for scandals, and Ethan is fool enough to put everything in writing." Tyler was beginning to appreciate Brooke's level of calculated ruthlessness. "And Diane?" he asked. Brooke gave a thin smile. "Oh, don't worry. Once Ethan's out of the picture, she'll be dealing with her own problems." Tyler didn't doubt it. Diane had always been the type of person who needed things to be stable, which was ironic, considering she was the one who had just burned their marriage to the ground for some guy who posted gym selfies like they were works of art. Brooke tapped her nails against the table. "When do you plan on confronting her?" Tyler exhaled. "Soon, but I want her to walk into it." Jack grinned. "Oh, this is going to be good." Diane's mood over the next few days was sickeningly cheerful. Tyler watched her from across the kitchen as she poured herself a cup of coffee, humming a song under her breath. She had been glowing lately, and he hated that he had once thought it was because she was happy with him. Jessica, who was still playing the role of Diane's personal cheerleader, took her usual seat next to her mother and made a show of ignoring her father. "Morning, sweetie," Diane said, running a hand through Jessica's hair like they were in some kind of touching mother-daughter movie montage. Tyler looked over at Jack, who rolled his eyes so hard he might have given himself a headache. Diane turned to Tyler, all fake warmth. "You okay? You've been quiet lately." Tyler gave her a small smile. just taking it all in. Diane hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. Well, let me know if you want to talk. He almost laughed. Jack was an expert at playing fool. That evening, while Diane was scrolling through her phone, probably texting hustle, grind, win, himself, Jack casually walked in and leaned against the counter. So, Mom, he said, his voice perfectly innocent. Did you hear about Ethan? Diane barely looked up. What about him? Jack smirked. Oh, nothing. Just that his girlfriend dumped him and sent a bunch of screenshots to his team. Diane's fingers froze mid-scroll. Tyler, who had been pretending to read a magazine, turned the page slowly. Jessica, completely unaware of the tension suddenly flooding the room, sighed. Jack, why do you always talk about this stupid baseball team? Diane forced a laugh. Yeah, Jack, why do you? Jack shrugged. Just interesting, that's all. Oh, and you'll never guess who sent the screenshots. Diane finally looked at him. Who? Jack grinned. Brooke. It was subtle, but Tyler saw it. The way Diane's shoulders tensed. The way her grip on the phone tightened. Jack continued, like he was just having a casual chat. Yeah, she apparently found out Ethan was cheating on her. Crazy, huh? Jessica, still clueless, frowned. That's awful. She must be heartbroken. Jack nodded. Oh, definitely. But I think what really got her was the fact that one of the women Ethan was seeing was married. Silence. Jessica, still not picking up on anything, scoffed. Ugh, who does that? Diane's smile was officially gone. Well, she said, standing up, this has been a fun conversation, but I need to go run some errands. Jack leaned back, arms crossed. Oh, take your time, Mom. She walked out of the room so fast it was almost impressive. Jessica, finally noticing that something was weird, looked between her dad and brother. Okay, what was that? Tyler stood up, patting Jack on the shoulder. Nothing, sweetheart. Just a very interesting morning. Jessica frowned but didn't say anything. Jack waited until Diane was out of earshot before grinning. Well, that was fun. Tyler smirked. That was just the warm-up. That night, Diane avoided him. She didn't try to make conversation, didn't ask about his day, didn't even sit in the same room. Tyler let her stew. The real fun was about to begin. He had his evidence. He had his witnesses. And most importantly, he had patience. Diane had no idea what was coming. And Tyler? He was finally looking forward to something. Tyler had expected Diane to come up with an excuse. Maybe she'd try to gaslight him into thinking he was imagining things. Maybe she'd throw a dramatic fit and turn herself into the victim. Maybe she'd cry. He had seen all those tactics before, not just from her, but from people in general. It was an old game, one he didn't feel like playing. But Diane surprised him. She said nothing. She avoided him completely, moving through the house like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. Jessica, of course, had noticed, but instead of questioning it, she just took her mother's side in silence, sitting next to her on the couch like a bodyguard. Jack, on the other hand, looked like he was having the time of his life. Tyler caught him smirking every time Diane entered a room. He had started casually mentioning Ethan at the dinner table just to watch her flinch. So, Dad, Jack said one evening, stirring his drink like a talk show host preparing for a juicy segment. You hear about the baseball team? Apparently, they're cutting players left and right. Probably looking for guys who don't get caught in scandals. Diane's hand froze around her fork. Jessica sighed dramatically. Oh my God, can you stop talking about baseball for 5 minutes? Jack shrugged. I think it's interesting. Right, Mom? Diane smiled tightly. I have no idea what you're talking about. Jack grinned. Oh, I think you do. Tyler had to turn away to hide his own smirk. It was going to happen soon. He could feel it. And sure enough, 2 nights later, Diane snapped. It started when Tyler was in the garage, sorting through old boxes. He didn't hear Diane come in at first, too focused on deciding whether or not to throw away a bunch of useless junk he had forgotten existed. Then, there was the sound of someone clearing their throat. He turned around, and there she was, standing in the doorway like some kind of reluctant ghost. We need to talk, she said. Tyler nodded slowly. Yeah, we do. She hesitated. That was a rare thing. Diane had always been quick with words, ready to argue, ready to spin a situation to her advantage. But now, she was pausing, trying to figure out her approach. Tyler didn't help her. He just waited. Diane sighed. Look, I don't know what you think is going on. Tyler actually laughed. He couldn't help it. Diane. She blinked at him. He pulled his phone out of his pocket, scrolled through his gallery, and then turned the screen toward her. The video. The one Jack had taken. Diane stared at it, her face blank. Then, slowly, she looked back up at him. There it was. The moment of realization. The moment she knew there was no way out of this one. Tyler expected anger. Maybe some tears. Instead, Diane just let out a small, humorless laugh. Well, she said, I guess you finally got one over on me. Tyler narrowed his eyes. What's that supposed to mean? Diane crossed her arms. You always wanted to be the one in control, didn't you? Well, congratulations. You won. Tyler let out a slow breath. This isn't a competition, Diane. She gave a small shrug. It is now. And just like that, she walked out. By morning, she had hired a lawyer. By noon, she had filed for divorce. By evening, she had told Jessica. That part hit harder than anything else. Jessica stormed into the kitchen, eyes red, voice shaking. How could you do this to Mom? Tyler, who had been drinking his coffee in peace, barely looked up. Do what? Jessica glared. You humiliated her. Jack, sitting across the table, let out a low whistle. Wow, that's an interesting take. Jessica ignored him. She told me everything. You've been spying on her, collecting evidence like some kind of psycho. Tyler cut her off. She cheated. Jessica's face twisted in anger. She made a mistake. Tyler let out a short, humorless laugh. Yeah, a mistake she repeated multiple times with a guy who still needs an ID check to buy beer. Jessica clenched her fists. You don't even care, do you? Tyler finally met her gaze. No, Jessica. I cared for 23 years. I cared while I worked my back into the ground to give you and your brother a good life. I cared when I made sacrifices to make sure this family had everything it needed. I cared when I trusted your mother. But you know when I stopped caring? When I found out she was sleeping behind my back. Jessica's eyes welled up. You're such a... Jack cut in before she could finish. Jess, think about what you're saying right now. Jessica turned on him. Oh, so now you're on his side? Jack's expression hardened. Yeah, I am. Jessica let out a frustrated noise, grabbed her bag, and stormed out. Tyler sighed. That went well. Jack shook his head. She'll calm down. Tyler wasn't so sure. Diane's demands came in the next morning. She wanted the house, the car, and, of course, full custody of Jessica. Jack, reading over the document, let out a low whistle. Wow, she really thinks she's getting everything. Tyler stared at the paper. He wasn't surprised. Jack grinned. Good thing we have receipts. And they did. A video, screenshots of messages, and, thanks to Brooke, a timeline of Diane's activities over the past several months. It was all going to court. And Tyler? He was ready. The court date arrived faster than expected. Diane, true to form, played the role of the heartbroken wife perfectly. She dabbed at imaginary tears. She threw in dramatic pauses. She sighed at all the right moments. Jack leaned over and whispered, Think she practiced this? Tyler whispered back, Definitely. Diane's lawyer argued that she deserved everything. She had sacrificed for this family. She had endured so much. Tyler's lawyer countered with one simple thing, evidence. The judge reviewed it all in silence. Diane shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Jessica sat next to her, arms crossed, glaring at Tyler like he had personally burned down their house. Jack, on the other hand, looked relaxed. The judge finally spoke. Jessica would stay with Diane. But the house and car? They belonged to Tyler. Diane's face fell. Jack squeezed his father's shoulder. Tyler just nodded. Diane tried to argue, of course. But the ruling was final. By the next week, she was packing her things. Jessica barely spoke to Tyler as she left. Diane, standing by the door, looked at him for a long moment. Then, she smirked. You think this makes you the good guy? Tyler shrugged. I don't care. She scoffed and walked out. Jack let out a breath. Well, that was fun. Tyler just stared at the empty space where Diane used to be. Jack nudged him. You okay? Tyler nodded. For the first time in a long time, he actually was. Diane took exactly 3 days to start acting like she was the victim of the biggest injustice in modern history. Tyler had expected it to happen much sooner, but apparently she needed some time to put together her version of reality where she was the tragic hero and he was the evil villain who had cruelly torn apart their family. She wasted no time spreading the story. By the end of the week, Tyler had already gotten the first awkward text from an old mutual friend who just wanted to check in, but immediately launched into a speech about how divorce was hard on everyone. And maybe he should consider being more understanding. Tyler had responded with a simple, I understand perfectly. That's why I divorced her. Jack found the entire thing hilarious. They're buying it? He asked, flipping through his phone with an amused expression. She's actually convinced people you were the bad guy? Tyler shrugged. People love a good sob story. Jack smirked. Too bad we have an actual documented story. And that was the best part. Diane could run her mouth all she wanted, but the court records weren't changing. The evidence wasn't disappearing. She could play the betrayed woman all day long, but at the end of it, she had been kicked out of the house, left with no money from Tyler, and was now stuck in a tiny rental apartment with Jessica, who had made it very clear she wasn't happy about it. She's miserable, Jack said one evening, setting his phone down. Jessica's been complaining all over social media. Apparently, the apartment is too small and too depressing. Tyler took a sip of his drink. Oh no. How terrible. Jack grinned. She also hates Diane's new boyfriend. Tyler blinked. What? Jack leaned forward, clearly enjoying every second of this. Diane's dating someone new. Some guy named Greg. Jessica already can't stand him. Tyler raised an eyebrow. Greg. Jack nodded. Greg. 45. Works in finance. From what I gathered, he's the most boring man alive. Tyler couldn't stop the smirk from forming. So that was what Diane had downgraded to. A middle-aged finance guy. From a 26-year-old baseball player to a guy who probably spent his weekends analyzing stock trends. It was like watching someone go from a terrible reality show to a dull corporate training video. Jack laughed. Jessica's losing it. She thought mom was going to have some fun, glamorous new life. Instead, she's trapped in a tiny apartment with a guy who probably talks about tax brackets for fun. Tyler wasn't surprised. Diane had never been able to function without a man around. She was the kind of person who needed to latch onto someone, preferably someone who could make her life easier. But Greg? Greg sounded like a punishment. Jack grinned. You want to hear the best part? Tyler raised an eyebrow. There's more. Jack nodded, biting back a laugh. Ethan dumped her. Tyler blinked. Already. Jack held up his phone. 2 months ago. Apparently, after everything blew up, Ethan realized dating an older, recently divorced woman wasn't the dream he thought it was. So he bailed. Tyler let out a slow breath. It was done. Diane had lost everything. Her marriage. The house. The car. The golden fantasy of running off with some younger guy and starting fresh. Now, she was stuck in a tiny apartment, with a daughter who was angry at her, dating a guy who probably talked about 401k contributions during dinner. Jack exhaled. So, how does it feel? Tyler thought about it. For months, he had been through nothing but stress. The betrayal. The divorce. The court battle. Jessica turning against him. He had braced himself for every possible bad outcome. And yet, here he was. In his own house. With his son, who had stood by him. With no more battles left to fight. And Diane? Diane had nothing. Tyler smirked. Feels pretty good. Jack grinned. Knew it would. And for the first time in a long time, Tyler knew that everything was exactly as it should be. The last time Diane had walked out of the house, she had done it with her head high, wearing that smug look she always put on when she thought she had everything figured out. Tyler had watched her leave, arms crossed, already knowing how it was going to end for her. And now, months later, here she was again, except this time, she wasn't walking in like she owned the place. She was standing at the door, shifting her weight from foot to foot like some kid who got caught breaking a window and was debating whether or not to run. Jack, standing next to his father, looked at her and let out a low whistle. Wow, didn't think I'd see this today. Tyler said nothing. He just waited. Diane cleared her throat. Can we talk? Jack smirked. We're talking. Diane ignored him. Tyler. He raised an eyebrow. Diane. She let out a slow breath. Can we do this privately? Tyler shook his head. Nope. Jack grinned. Yeah, I'd really love to hear what you have to say. Diane shot him a look, then turned back to Tyler. Can I come in? Tyler didn't move. Why? Diane swallowed. I wanted to talk. Jack leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. What happened? Greg kick you out already? Diane flinched. Tyler exhaled sharply. Figures. She hesitated, and that was all the confirmation he needed. So, Greg hadn't been her big fresh start after all. It had probably started out fine, some boring, stable guy to latch on to, someone to make her feel like she was still in control. But Diane had never been the type to handle reality well. She liked comfort. She liked security. And Greg, apparently, had gotten tired of dealing with whatever version of reality she had tried to sell him. Tyler couldn't say he was surprised. Jack clicked his tongue. Let me guess. You don't have a place to stay. Diane's jaw tightened. I didn't come here to beg. Tyler tilted his head. Then why did you come here? Diane didn't answer right away. She was looking at the house, her eyes moving across the front porch, the windows, the driveway. Tyler knew that look. It was the same look she had when she used to go shopping and stare at things she wanted but couldn't have. He sighed. Diane, whatever it is you think is going to happen, it's not. She looked at him, something flickering in her expression. You made your choices, Tyler continued, voice calm. You wanted to be free. You got what you wanted. Diane's hands clenched into fists. That's not fair. Jack let out a sharp laugh. Are you serious? Tyler wasn't even mad. He was just tired. Diane, I gave you everything. I spent years making sure this family had what it needed. And you threw it all away for some moron who probably thinks reading a menu counts as literature. Diane's face twisted. I made a mistake. Tyler shrugged. Yeah, you did. She took a step forward. We could. No. The word was final. Diane shut her mouth, eyes darting between him and Jack. Tyler crossed his arms. You made your bed. Go lie in it. Diane's lips pressed together. She gave one last glance at the house, then at Jack, who was watching her with zero sympathy. Finally, she let out a breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked back to her car. Jack exhaled. Well, that was fun. Tyler nodded. They stood there in silence as Diane drove away, disappearing down the street without a single glance back. Jack looked at his dad. You good? Tyler thought about it. For years, he had been carrying the weight of a marriage that had been built on nothing but his effort. He had put everything he had into it, and for what? So Diane could throw it all away the second she got bored? But now, he was free. The house was his. His life was his. And most importantly, he had Jack, his son, the one person who had stood by him through all of this. Tyler let out a slow breath. Yeah, he said. I'm good. Jack grinned. Good. Because we should celebrate. Tyler smirked. What did you have in mind? Jack clapped him on the back. Let's start with deleting Mom's number. Tyler laughed. And for the first time in a long time, it wasn't bitter. It was real. It was over. And life was finally his again. Thanks for watching. Rate the story in the comments. Subscribe to the channel